Last night, as I'm recording this video, the Los Angeles Clippers finished off the 2-0 comeback. They won 4 games in a row against the Utah Jazz, absolutely destroyed them in the last 3 games that they won. And in game 5 and 6, we know that they did this without their star player in Kawhi Leonard. And having Kawhi off of your team is obviously going to make a huge difference. But for the Clippers, they still absolutely dominated. And last night's game was just absolutely insane. I mean, I watched the game until the end of the first half when it was 72-50 for the Jazz, and then I didn't even watch the second half because I thought the game was over, and the Clippers ended up winning 131-119. Now, despite me not watching the second half, I did still watch most of this series, and you can tell that a lot of role players really stepped up for the Clippers, especially in game 5 and 6. I mean, all the attention immediately goes to Paul George, and for good reason. He's absolutely stepped up and taken on the role of being the number 1 guy for this Clippers team with Kawhi out, and he's completely put all of those pandemic P narratives out of the heads of all of us NBA fans. He's absolutely stepped up this playoff run. But the biggest thing that have stood out to me is how the Clippers have gotten tons of huge contributions from role players that weren't really expected to step up, but they absolutely did. I mean, a guy like Terrence Mann absolutely stands out. He had 39 points last night, which is just absolutely insane, completely out of nowhere. A guy like Nicholas Batum, who's great on both ends. He's a great defender, very versatile, a good passer, playmaker, and shooter, and does a great job of stretching the floor. And also a guy like Marcus Morris, who has also really stepped up on both ends this playoffs, is a great floor spacer and can also create his own shot, and he's scored a ton this playoff run. All 3 of these role players are really underrated and have really stepped up, but the guy that stands out the most to me is Reggie Jackson. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about why Reggie Jackson is probably one of the most underrated players in the NBA, at least in my eyes right now, and what he's done in this playoffs and just how good he's been, and how the Clippers probably wouldn't be doing what they're doing right now without Reggie Jackson. He's stepped up in a huge way, and I'll be talking about why I think he's really underrated in today's video. Before we get started, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. I'm posting a ton right now during the playoffs, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'm also on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so help out the channel and also get some extra content by hitting that subscribe button. With that being said, let's get into the video officially. So I'm going to start off by talking about Reggie Jackson scoring this playoffs and just how good of an overall scorer he's been. So he's played 13 games with the Clippers in the playoffs, played in every single game for them in their playoff run so far, beating the Mavericks in 7 games and coming back from 2-0, and now coming back from 2-0 against the Utah Jazz and winning in 6 games. And Reggie's scoring has just been absolutely insane. He's averaging 17 points per game right now, and that's almost a career high for him in the playoffs, one off of his 18 points per game that he put up with the Detroit Pistons in the 2019 playoffs. But ever since Reggie Jackson got waived last season and the Clippers ended up picking him up, we all thought that his career was almost over. He wasn't going to have a huge contribution, especially in the playoffs. So the fact that he's averaging almost a career high in points right now in the playoffs with the Clippers is absolutely amazing. His prime years, as most of us think, these were his prime years in Detroit. He played 6 years with Detroit, and he also played the early years of his career with the OKC Thunder. But he's proving that right now in this playoff run, he might be playing like the best he ever has in his career. So it's amazing to see him come back like this. Now, what really stands out for me is Reggie's averaging 17 points per game throughout the 13 games in the playoffs, but his efficiency has been absolutely insane, and this is really what stands out to me. He's shooting 50% from the field, 44% from 3, and 92% from the line. So he's shooting over 50, 40, 90, which is obviously insane. It's a very small sample size of 13 playoff games, but the fact that he's doing this in the playoffs consistently for over the course of 2 rounds as a point guard who not only has a difficult play style but really creates his own shot a lot of the time. If you watch Reggie Jackson play and you've watched the Clippers in this playoff run, you know that most of his buckets are really him creating his own shot. He does things like beat people off the dribble with his speed, which is very good. He does a great job of shooting threes and creating his own shot on the perimeter, doing things like using dribble moves to get open, really creating his own shot, taking a lot of step backs, side steps, and hitting some tough shots. So the fact that he's not only averaging 17 points per game, but shooting 50, 40, 90 with a play style that he creates his own shot a lot of the time is just absolutely insane. We have to start considering considering Reggie Jackson after this playoff run that he's had as potentially a top 15 point guard, and no one has really considered him that throughout pretty much all of his career, I think. So the fact that he kind of deserves to be in those conversations right now, and no one has really even brought him into that conversation yet, proves that he's pretty underrated. And that's really my main point of this video, is Reggie Jackson's doing amazing things for this team, and he's not necessarily getting as much recognition as I think he deserves. Like I mentioned, I think putting him into at least just a conversation of being a top 15 point guard right now is what I think he deserves, based off of the fact that in the playoffs, the time when it matters the most, at times he's led this Clippers team. If Paul George sometimes doesn't have it going, he's obviously been the main leader without Kawhi for the last 2 games, but a lot of the time Reggie will take charge, create his own shot, and average 17 points on 50, 40, 90 shooting and 44% from the three-point line is just amazing, and that's stuff that a top 10 point guard does, and Reggie Jackson needs to get more recognition for the insane playoff run that he's having right now. He's also shooting 64% effective field goal percentage, which is a stat that kind of incorporates the fact that 3 is worth more than 2, and that's very high. 64% is very good in terms of compared to the league average, and it's absolutely a playoff career high for Reggie, and he has a 67% true shooting, which is absolutely amazing. That's plus 11 relative true shooting, which means it's 11% higher than the league average true shooting. So overall, he's just been incredibly efficient. 50, 40, 90 shooting for a guy that mostly creates his own shot, averaging 17 points per game, and he needs to get more recognition for what he's done for this Clippers team, especially scoring the basketball. He's been a huge key to success for them, an extremely effective player for them right now, and he's just doing amazing things on the court, and I honestly don't know where they would be without Reggie Jackson right now. The next thing I want to talk about Reggie Jackson is his defense. Most people would probably classify him as either an average defender or a slightly below average defender, but I think he's an over average defender. He brings a lot of great things defensively, has great perimeter defense. For the playoffs this year, has a defensive box plus minus of 0, so exactly even, showing that based off of that stat only, he's an average defender. But you got to look at some other things here. In the playoffs so far this season, he's done a great job in some really tough matchups. I mean, we start with Luka Doncic, and in the series against the Mavericks for the Clippers, lots of different guys were thrown at Luka. He faced lots of different matchups, but Reggie was a really tough one. But in total throughout the series, he guarded him for a grand total of about 9 minutes. And despite the big height disadvantage here for Reggie Jackson, he forced him to 3 turnovers in total and only 5 assists, and held him to 10 of 20 from the floor. And that's 50% shooting, which is still really good for a guy with Luka's playstyle. But considering the height disadvantage there for Reggie, along with the fact that Luka was just absolutely going insane this series, it's just amazing that Reggie Jackson was able to play pretty good defense against Luka Doncic despite the height disadvantage. For most of that series against the Mavericks, he guarded Tim Hardaway Jr. He guarded him for a grand total of 20 minutes, held him to 28% from the field. Again, you can really see, especially when you watch Reggie play, that he's a pretty good perimeter defender, does a great job of doing things like contesting threes, not getting beat off the dribble, moving side to side, bringing a lot of energy out there on the perimeter. And in his matchups against Tim Hardaway Jr., he held him to 6 of 21 from the field, which is only 28% approximately. And again, a matchup in this series that against the Jazz that he's had for a grand total of 11 minutes was against Donovan Mitchell, and Mitchell was just absolutely cooking the Jazz this series. And Reggie didn't do a great job on him, held him to 14 of 26 from the field, which is 54%, which is a great percentage for Mitchell. But again, the assist to turnover ratio here is exactly even, which is very good as a defender. 4 assists and 4 turnovers, and overall, despite Reggie only being about 6'2", I believe, he's played really well defensively and just brought a lot of energy against some really tough matchups. And in the playoffs, I would absolutely classify him as an over average defender. He does great things on the perimeter. He's not versatile again because of his size and height and how he's a point guard, but especially on the perimeter, he's absolutely an over average defender. Another underrated aspect of his game. The last thing I want to talk about Reggie Jackson just briefly is his passing ability and his playmaking. So for this playoffs, he's averaged 3.3 assists and only 1.2 turnovers, so that's almost a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which for the NBA is considered elite. He obviously doesn't create that many turnovers, and especially in this series against the Jazz, has done a great job with his court vision and making the right pass at the right time. And he also has an assist percentage for the playoffs over the course of this entire playoffs of 20%, which is also pretty good. He has an offensive box plus minus of around +3, which is very good for his position, and a box creation of around 7, which is approximately how many open shots you create per game. So in the playoffs, he's got a box creation of around 7, and he's created a lot of open shots for the amount of times that he gets the ball. Has overall just done a great job of being an effective playmaker, not turning it over. Like I mentioned, a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which is very good, and overall he's an underrated playmaker as well. Reggie Jackson overall has been a huge success for this Clippers team. Like I've said multiple times throughout the video, I'm not sure they could have pulled off this comeback without him. He's an underrated player at all of these aspects of the game, with his scoring, his defense, and his playmaking. I think he deserves a lot more recognition for what he's doing right now and how he's absolutely dominating the playoffs. So there you guys have it. That is the end of today's video. Comment down below your thoughts on Reggie Jackson, and if you agree with me that he's one of the most underrated players right now. If you're new, as I mentioned, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next video.